The Tour de France is the biggest and most important bike race on the calendar, and we're here in Florence at the 2024 Grand Depart, touring the team hotels looking for the hottest pro bikes. Now we've got custom paint jobs, pro mechanic hacks, and loads of key measurements. These are the most in-depth bike checks you're going to find anywhere on the internet. But before we get to any of that, a big thanks to Motul for sponsoring this part of the video, and if you enjoy it, don't forget to give it a like and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. This is the Wilier Filante SLR of Mark Cavendish, his last Tour de France, the bike he's going to try and break the stage win record on this year. Now it is the same frame that we saw last year at the Tour de France, but it's got a brand new paint job for this year. This paint job is using different colours to sort of signify and commemorate achievements from Cav's illustrious career. Most prominently, the yellow kind of signifies his time spent wearing the yellow jersey. We've got green for his 2 wins of the green jersey at the Tour de France. And then the rest of the kind of rainbow colours signify his Road World Race Championship win in Copenhagen in 2011. Now the Filante SLR frame set is Wilier's kind of all-round aero road bike frame set. It's not as aggressive as some of the other aero road bikes on the market, but it's kind of more in the vein of the Specialized Tarmac SLA or the kind of the brand new Trek Madone SLR. Now beyond that, a lot's changed since last year. In terms of wheels, Cavendish last year was running head Vanquish wheels, but this year the team has switched to Vision Metron 60 SL wheels. Conceptually, it's a similar overall wheel set, but perhaps the kind of team feels this is a kind of stronger performing option, or maybe they just got a better sponsorship arrangement. Cavendish is still using 28C front and rear Vittoria Corsa Pro TLR tyres. Now we've been looking around the Astana mechanics trucks this morning, and a lot of riders are some of them are using 30C tyres front and rear, some of them are using a 30C on the rear and a 28C on the front, but Cavendish has stuck with 28s front and rear. Perhaps that's the most aero option, and as a smaller rider, he maybe doesn't need as much tyre volume as some of the bigger riders on the team. Now in terms of measurements, those are coming up a little bit larger than last year. Cavendish was running 28s last year as well, but on the head rims they came up slightly under, around 27.5 millimetres. This year they're coming up a little bit bigger, just over 28 millimetres on the back and actually a little bit wider on the front. So maybe this rear tyre just needs a little top up of air. Cavendish has also changed his handlebar. Last year he had a really lovely Wilier integrated classic bend handlebar, which I waxed lyrical about in our Tour de France video last year, which you can watch up there if you haven't seen it. And this year though, he's switched to a kind of much more modern looking thing. It's a Vision Metron bar, and also the dimensions has changed as well. So last year he was running a 40 centimetre wide handlebar with a 130 millimetre stem, and he had his levers quite far down the drops for a lot of extra reach. Whereas this year he seems to be running a bar that's around 385 millimetres centre to centre at the hoods, and then the stem's 120 millimetres, and as you can see the brake hoods are much farther up, so he's not getting quite as much reach. So he's obviously had a couple of positional changes there as well. Elsewhere on the bike, Cavendish is running Shimano Dura Ace 12-speed, but it's interesting because he and some of his teammates are not actually running the latest 12-speed chainrings. Instead, they've got these 11-speed Dura Ace R9100 chainrings up front, which are, technically 11-speed, and Shimano says they're not actually compatible. Now we did see a few years ago when the 12-speed group sets launched, we saw a few riders running the kind of old 11-speed power meters and chainrings with the new 12-speed group sets when kind of availability of the new power meters wasn't so good. And that was an era when we saw quite a few dropped chains. Now I asked the mechanic about it, and he said that the riders simply feel that these chainrings offer better shifting than the 12-speed ones. Now in terms of chainring size, Cav's running some pretty beefy 55-42 chainrings up front. He does have an 11-34 tooth cassette out front, but obviously 42-34 is still a pretty spicy gear, even for a rider as fit as Mark Cavendish. Last year, Cavendish also had a SLF Motion oversized pulley wheel system. This year they don't have that, so I don't know if that's simply the riders don't want to use them anymore, or perhaps more likely just a sponsorship arrangement that came to an end. Last year, Cavendish was also running a single sprint shifter on the right trigger, just behind the brake lever, but that's not there this year, so I'm guessing either it just simply doesn't work as well with this kind of shape of bar, or he just feels that he's just going to use the normal Di2 buttons instead, and that'll be fine. And they've also switched over from Luc Keo blade pedals to Shimano Dura Ace pedals this year. Again, I don't know if that's a kind of sponsorship thing. They've changed over from Luc pedals to Shimano. It might just be that a lot of the riders prefer Shimano Dura Ace pedals. We know that this is like a perennially popular choice within the pro peloton, and it could just be that they prefer this system. Now Wilier says this paint job will be available to buy until the end of this year. We don't have pricing information, but I can kind of assume it probably won't be cheap. But if you fancy yourself a special edition Cav paint job to celebrate his career, then that will be available. But the most important thing is, how much does it weigh? Now, at last year's tour, we weighed Cavendish's bike and it weighed 7.76 kilos. Is this one any lighter? Let's find out. Okay, 7.654. So, about 100 grams lighter than last year. Not a huge amount, still a relatively heavy bike, but obviously they do have the new Wilier Verticale SLR lightweight bike, which they can switch to on the mountain stages if they want to. Well, look at this. This is a Remco Evenepoel's bike of Soudal Quick-Step. Obviously, befitting of a rider of his caliber, it is a custom paint job. Now, apparently he's been using this since the Criterium de Dauphiné, but this is the first time I've had a look at it up close. What's kind of really interesting about this paint job is it has the kind of purple flip colours around the bottom bracket that kind of mirror his teammates' bikes, but then up here you've got this real kind of silver chrome paint job covering the end of the top tube down onto the seat tube and the seat stays, and it looks wicked in the sun. Up front, it's kind of more black, presumably maybe just even a kind of like a really light clear coat over the carbon. Also has a really cool little detail on top with his little Remco name and the little Wolfpack symbol, which is the kind of team symbol of Soudal Quick-Step. Now, in terms of the Tarmac SL8, not a brand new bike. Seen it around since I think the World Championships last year. However, very cool, 685 gram claimed frame weight in a size medium. I think this might be a size smaller than that, a 52, so possibly even lighter. Now, it's a really interesting bike. It kind of has the front end of the old Venge with the kind of middle section of the Tarmac, and then a kind of the bottom bracket area is apparently inspired by the Aphos, which is kind of specialized ultra lightweight bike. The most notable aspect and the kind of thing that kind of drew the most comments when it first launched is the kind of head tube section and this little extended nose, which Specialized calls the speed sniffer. And I don't really like that name, but I think it looks much better in person, especially with the kind of cockpit slammed right down. I think with if you have a kind of few spaces above it, it tends to look a bit more awkward, but with the new Roval Rapide handlebar slammed right on top of it, actually looks really good. So while we're on the handlebar, just had the tape measure out, and Remco's running a 36 centimeter bar center to center with a 120mm stem. Now, he's not the biggest rider in the bunch, but that's still a pretty aggressive position. And kind of one interesting detail is that Remco Evenepoel used to run his levers tilted in quite aggressively, but because of the new UCI rules that basically ban that, it looks like he's not really doing that anymore. Now, the kind of latest Shimano levers have a kind of natural inward tilt, but he isn't tilting them into the kind of extremes that he was before. He's also running a kind of zero offset seat post. It almost looks like it's been flipped forward as well to give him a kind of really slammed forward position. On top of that, he's got a specialized 3D printed, looks like a 3D printed specialized power saddle. Looking at the rest of the bike, Remco Evenepoel's running the standard kind of Dura Ace 12-speed group set that all of the Shimano sponsored teams are running these days. This particular bike doesn't actually have a power meter on it, so I wonder if this might be his spare bike, because I would assume that Remco does race with a power meter. In terms of gearing, Remco's running the 54-42 front chain rings with an 11 to 34 cassette out back. That's kind of becoming pretty standard in the Pro Peloton. In terms of wheels, he's running the latest Roval Rapide CLX team wheels. Now, these have just been released. They use the same rims as the previous Roval Rapide CLX2 wheels, but they've got updated hubs. They're kind of similar aero performance, if not the same aero performance, but just a little bit lighter overall. So don't know if he's going to run these on the first stage because it's very, very hilly. I did wonder if he might run the Alpinist wheels for a little bit lower weight. Now, the tyres are really interesting. These are an old model, the Specialized Turbo Cottons that were originally released in 2014, so like a decade ago. And I can't really think of anything else in the Pro Peloton from a decade ago that's still being used today. But they must have a great ride quality because they've got that open tubular cotton construction. I think they're still pretty competitive in terms of rolling resistance. You know, I don't know if Specialized has updated the rubber compound for the Pro team since they were first released, but it looks really cool as well. I really like the tan wheels and I think they go really, really nicely with this bike. In terms of weight, it's coming in at bang on 7 kilos, which isn't too bad considering this is a pretty aero bike. It's got the aero wheels on. Doesn't have a Garmin, but there is a little chain catcher down there. I imagine with the Alpinist wheels, they probably get that down to about 6.8, 6.9, pretty good. All right, so we're here at the EF Education Easy Post. And this is the American rider Neilson Powless's Cannondale SuperSix Evo Lab 71. Now this isn't a new bike and it's not a paint job for the Tour de France, but obviously couldn't resist it. Look at this paint job. It's really, really lovely. Obviously it's got the pink of EF Education Easy Post kind of team colors, and then mixed in with that yellow as well. Like, it's a perfect paint job for the Tour de France. And I think this has got to be one of the best paint jobs I've seen so far at this year's Tour. Now the Lab 71 frame set is the kind of top tier model that Cannondale makes. And that means it's the lightest and most expensive version of the SuperSix Evo. And the SuperSix Evo used to top out at the high mod level. This one's even higher than that. And what do you get for your extra money? You get about 40 grams of weight saving in total, and that costs you an extra 1,500 euros or dollars. So this SuperSix Evo Lab 71 frame set costs 6,000 euros or $6,000 compared to 4.5 for the high mod version. Now last year when we saw the EF team, we checked out Richard Carapaz's bike. You can watch that video by clicking up there. But this bike differs in quite a few ways. Now, obviously this doesn't have a kind of Olympic champions paint job like Carapaz's bike did. It's got the standard team issue paint job. But obviously Powless has a couple of personal choices that make his bike stand out versus Carapaz's as well. So most notably, Powless has opted for the Momo design integrated bar up front rather than the Vision Metron bar that some of the other team riders are using. Although if you see the bike from front on, you will still see a little Vision sticker up here, just because obviously you've got to keep those sponsors happy. So in terms of the claim frame weight, Cannondale says that a SuperSix Evo Lab 71 frame weighs 770 grams in a size 56, which is pretty light. In terms of the aerodynamic features on this bike, obviously you've got this kind of deep section carbon fork and the truncated aerofoil tube sections here. But at the back end of the bike, it's been dramatically slimmed down. So this seat tube in particular, in this seat post, is super, super thin, sort of side to side. So it's so thin, in fact, that there's no room anymore for a Di2 battery in the seat post, which is the kind of traditional location. And instead, Cannondale puts it up inside the bottom bracket. So just also, you know, Cannondale says, I don't really know how much difference this makes, but Cannondale says that helps put the kind of weight balance of the bike a little bit lower. Now, you know, we're only talking 50 grams or so, but I guess at the top level, every little helps. In terms of wheels, Powless is running the Vision Metron 60 SL tubeless wheels with Vittoria Corsa Pro tubeless tyres in a size 28C. We've also got these quite cool little pink anodized valves from Muck-Off, which look very nice, go very nicely with the frame set. So in terms of other little details as well, they've got a nice little cut of inner tube here. Now basically I think this is for where the bike race transponder goes. They just pop that bit over it so it just kind of smooths it out a little bit. And what I really like is that EF Education have gone for the kind of pink latex tube to match the rest of their bike, which is quite cool. A little bit more expensive to cut up a latex tube for this kind of thing, but it does look a little bit better. Now, in terms of drivetrain, Powless is running a Shimano Dura Ace 12-speed group set, but up front he's got an FSA Powerbox power meter paired with 54 40-tooth FSA chain rings. Now this kind of combination of big cassette out back and big chain rings up front is becoming increasingly common in the pro peloton. You know, we're not seeing so many tighter 11 to 32 cassette options. In fact, I haven't seen a single one at this year's Tour. In terms of final details, Powless is running this Wahoo Speedplay Aero pedals, which have a kind of, you know, the classic Speedplay entry point on one side and then a lovely little dimpled Golf Balls type aero profile on the rear. And then also, they're not running standard Shimano brake pads. They've got these little green brake pads in here, which I think are made by Swisside, although I can't tell without taking them out, and I don't think they'd be too happy if I took them out. Then up top, Neilson Powless is running a Pro Logo Nago Evo saddle with carbon rails. He's also got this nice little 3D printed race number holder on his seat post as well. And so last but not least, Neilson Powless is running a Wahoo Element Roam up front as his bike computer. But let's get on to things like measuring the tyres. We'll measure his cockpit and then we'll tell you the most important detail, how much it weighs. All right, as promised, let's measure those tyres. Like I said, these are 28C tyres on these rims and they're coming in at just slightly wider, 28.8. All right, so in terms of cockpit measurements, we have, so that is like 37 centimeters center to center on the bar and a relatively long stem of maybe 120 mils. All right, then let's get this thing on the scales and see how much it weighs. Ooh, okay, 7.74 kilos. So obviously this is quite a big bike. It's got the aero wheels on there. I wonder if they might switch to something slightly shallower for that first stage with lots of climbing, but you know, that's not too bad. So we're here with the Van Rysel RCR Pro. Now this is my first time seeing this bike in person. Pretty cool, as it's supposed to be one of the most affordable bikes in the pro peloton. Now obviously most affordable, take that with a pinch of salt, it still costs around £9,000. But I guess in the context of Tour de France bikes, that's not too bad. The new Pinarello Dogma F launch, prices for that start at £12,500. So I guess relative to that, this is pretty good value. The Van Rysel is a brand owned by Decathlon, Decathlon being one of the main sponsors of the team now. The bike itself is a brand new frame, completely developed by Van Rysel in collaboration with a French aerospace brand called Honora. I think overall, the most striking thing about it is it looks very similar to the Specialized Tarmac SL7. But you know, that's probably not a bad thing. That was a very popular bike, won a lot of races, usually renowned to be pretty fast, so I expect the pros to be pretty happy with that. Now, in terms of weight, Van Rysel claims that a painted size medium frame weighs 790 grams, which is pretty light. That's a little bit heavier than the S-Works version of Specialized Tarmac SL8, but it's still very competitive. You pair that with a 380 gram fork. So Van Rysel claims that a complete bike should come in around 6.8 kilos. In terms of wheels, the team is using these Swiss side wheels. I believe these are kind of very similar to DT Swiss wheels. I know that Swiss side and DT Swiss have a very close relationship, so these might actually basically be DT Swiss wheels with the Swiss side branding on them. On this bike, we've got Continental's GP5000 STR tyres. Now, at last year's tour, we did see quite a lot of Continental sponsored teams running the time trial version, which is the Continental GP5000 TTTR. And I do wonder if for some stages where the roads are good quality, riders might switch to those on this team, but we'll have to wait and see for that. The Decathlon team is sponsored by Shimano, and they are running the latest 12-speed Shimano Dura Ace Di2 R9200. This bike belongs to Paul Lapeira, and he's running the 54 40-tooth chainrings up front, paired with an 11 to 34-tooth cassette out back. In terms of pedals, he's got the new Luc Claessen blade pedals. Now, these are kind of interesting because they've got a flat underbody, which is said to be very aerodynamic. So up front, we've got this really cool integrated handlebar, which is bespoke for this bike, been developed between Van Rysel and Deda, which is an Italian components manufacturer. And it's really cool. It's got this like nice flat top on the stem. The bars have a kind of little aerofoil profile. I think there might be a little bit of flair to it as well. Developed specifically for this bike, like I said, I guess it integrates really cleanly with the head tube. There's a couple of spaces under there on this bike, but I think overall it looks really good. Finishing things off, we've got a Physique Argo carbon saddle up there, and they're running Elite Legaro carbon bottle cages. Now, this particular bike belongs to Paul Lapeira, but keep an eye out for Felix Gall of the same team. Came 8th overall at last year's tour, and I think he's got a good shot of making the top 10 again, potentially going for the King of the Mountains this year, so you might see a polka dot version of this bike later on in the race. Right, so in terms of measurements, Lapeira is running it's like a 36 centimetre handlebar paired with a 120mm stem. Pretty narrow, pretty long stem as well. Like, again, I think we're seeing more pros using narrow handlebars these days. It's just more aero overall. So on our scales, it weighs 7.455 kilos. So obviously that is a little bit different to the claimed weight that we gave you earlier. But there are a couple of things that explain that. I mean, first, obviously, the claimed weight that Van Rysel would give is without pedals, and pedals alone are going to add a couple of 100 grams. But then you've also got things like bottle cages, an out front mount, maybe slightly deeper wheels, slightly bigger tires. You know, all of these things just kind of add a few grams here and there. And obviously, you know, claimed weights are optimistic anyway. Some bikes come in a little bit under the claimed weight, some might come in a little bit over. So it'd be very rare that we hit a bike that's exactly the claimed weight. So here at the Israel Premier Tech Team Hotel, and we've got the new Factor Ostro van. Now, this particular bike belongs to Stevie Williams, the young Welshman. Now, this is the second generation Factor Ostro van. The first one was released a few years ago now, but this one came out earlier this year after we saw it first at the kind of Tour Down Under, I believe. Now, in terms of the overall silhouette, it's kind of pretty similar overall, but there have been some subtle changes. Now, first of all, Factor says it's 7 watts faster at 48 kilometers per hour, and it's very, very, very precise that it's 267.8 grams lighter overall. But I think that's just in terms of the frame set in the kit rather than as a complete bike. The main changes to the frame set though are the kind of more hourglass shaped head tube, so it's significantly thinner at the front and slimmer just in between the headset bearings. And the length of the fork cord lengths, the kind of aerofoil cord lengths, has got a little bit deeper as well. But then over the rest of the bike, it's kind of similar, but Factor has just redesigned the tube shape. So instead of being kind of wide camtail truncated aerofoil tubes, they're kind of all a little bit thinner and a little bit longer as well. If you look at the bike from the rear end, the seat tube and seat stays in particular are extremely thin. Now, the other thing that's new for this particular bike is this new paint job. That is kind of splattered red and blue that's all over the bike is essentially meant to represent the kind of cultural history of France. So it's a Tour de France specific paint job and most of the riders on the team are running it. Obviously, as I said, Factor does say it's faster than the old bike. Perhaps more significantly, it also claims that it's actually more aerodynamic than both the Specialized Tarmac SL8 and the Cervelo S5, which is pretty significant as, having spoken to a lot of brands about aero bikes, bikes like those are pretty well respected, and generally the Cervelo S5 in particular is supposed to be very fast. So if that's true, that's a pretty impressive claim. So in terms of drivetrain, Stevie Williams is running a Shimano 12-speed Dura Ace Di2 R9200 group set, but they're using the FSA Powerbox power meter chain set up front with the FSA carbon cranks and FSA chain rings. Stevie Williams is running a 54-40 tooth chainring set paired with an 11 to 34 tooth cassette out back. And he's also running the Shimano Dura Ace pedals. So these wheels are also new. These are the Black 8 48-58. Now the 48 and 58 refers to the rim depth. So you've got a 48 rim up front and a 58mm deep rim out the back. The kind of main selling point with these is the kind of ceramic speed bearings in the hub and then these carbon spokes that keep the weight really low. So Black Ink and Factor are claiming a total weight for the wheel set of 1,270 grams, which is pretty impressive for a kind of wheel set with rims this deep. On those wheels, Stevie's running the Continental GP 5000 STR tyres. They look to be a size 28, but we're going to measure those up front. He's got the Factor integrated handlebar that we saw last year on Simon Clark's bike at the Tour de France. Have the repositioned seat post clamp on this new bike too, which is kind of useful. I tested the old one and it had a kind of an annoying seat post clamp. It was under there, required a special little tool. They've just moved that to the back and it looks like you can just use a standard Allen key, which is really good. Also got a nice little 3D printed racer number holder here, which is quite cool. Finishing off, we've got a Sella Italia SLR carbon saddle up top and some Elite Leggero carbon bottle cages. Now, in fact, to launch this bike, they actually said it had some specifically designed aero bottle cages for this bike, but I guess Elite have a sponsorship arrangement with Israel Premier Tech and therefore they're going to run these ones, even though maybe the Factor ones are a little bit faster because you've got to keep the sponsors happy. So as mentioned, Factor says it's 267.8 grams lighter. Let's see how much it actually weighs on the scales overall. All right, so on our scales of truth, 7.535 kilograms. Now that's not super light. I think I have seen lighter builds of this bike, but I reckon, obviously with pedals, the FSA power box, power meter, and I think you can get a lighter saddle than this as well, probably shallower wheels. I reckon you could get it a little bit lighter, but likely pretty fast in this setup, so I don't think Stevie Williams will be too held back. So one thing I've just realised whilst we're kind of up close with these tyres is that last year when we saw the Factor bikes from Israel Premier Tech, they were running these Continental GP 5000 STR tyres, but they were actually blacking out the logos because they had a tyre sponsor that was Maxxis. Now this year they're not doing that. So obviously either change sponsor, maybe Maxxis had had enough, or simply they may be buying tyres from So we're just over by the little Trek mechanics trucks and we just had a little briefing on a really cool new product from Cyclowax. Now what this is, it's a kind of on-bike chain waxing device. It's quite a big contraption, but it is in prototype phase, so you kind of have to forgive the kind of like rough and ready situation. So the whole idea of it is you don't have to take the chain off the bike, because I think Cyclowax thinks that's a kind of big barrier to people. They want to burn through, quick links or like kind of pins all that often. So basically this is, like I say, you just waxes the chain while it's on the bike and it just draws it through ever so gently. It takes around half an hour, but obviously by the time you've like heated up a slow cooker, melted the wax, put the chain in, this is the kind of similar amount of time overall. And the idea is that you can just kind of leave this to do its thing and it's nice and safe. Now Cyclowax, they said they already sell ready wax chains. So I know that degreasing a factory grease chain can be a bit of a barrier for people. They also sell their own kind of wax blends as well. So they're kind of trying to make it kind of like one-stop shop for getting a wax chain. Like I say, we've just had a briefing and now the little Trek mechanics are getting their briefing. Now this is Giulio Ciccone's bike behind us. The Cyclowax tells us that the little Trek team is going all in on wax chains for the Tour de France. Now obviously, kind of the difference between chain waxing and a regular drip lube for your chain is kind of marginal, but the Tour de France is the place for marginal gains. So in addition to the kind of on-bike chain waxer, they also have a couple of ultrasonic cleaners filled with molten wax that are going to clean little Trek's chains and then re-wax them throughout the tour. Now Cyclowax tells me they're using a two-stage process. We've got one with a kind of just normal wax in it that helps kind of rid the chain of any dirt and kind of gives it a first wax coating. Then it goes into the second one where that kind of clean wax coating melts off, but then that second one has friction modifiers and additives in there to just give it a really fast wax finish. As well as the ultrasonic cleaners, they also have a really cool little chain braking device. So it looks like a kind of chain ring and a couple of pulley wheels. And what that does is when the chain comes out of the second wax bath, obviously it dries and then it goes really, really stiff. So you have to break up the links before you can reinstall it on the bike and start shifting again. Now, when I'm at home waxing my own chains, I just run them around a post or a piece of piping or something. But I guess, when you're working for a World Tour team, you need a slicker solution than a piece of PVC piping. Now, you might be thinking that this is actually going to end up in bike shops, pretty sizable contraption, but actually CycloWax says they're going to bring this to consumers and everyday riders, so that means if you want one of these, you will be able to buy one at some point. We don't have pricing at this point though. It is in prototype phase, so we'll forgive them that. But let me know in the comments, would you be interested in an on-bike chain waxing machine? All right, those were the hottest bikes from the Grand Depart of the 2024 Tour de France, but which one was the hottest, the spiciest, too hot to handle? Let us know in the comments below. And of course, if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. And if you want more from the 2024 Tour de France, why not watch this video on all the new bikes we saw?